So today I'm here to refute Abril Rivera's claim, which revolves on the topic of racial profiling. Her main claim is that racial profiling continues on the black community, and her secondary claims were that first, it dehumanizes the minorities. The second one is that it has a negative effect on the youth. And the third one is that it makes the minorities distrust the system. Well, first off, racial profiling is a type of search that the law enforcement use that uses race instead of ethics to find specific potential criminals, which means that majority of the law enforcement tackle on the specific race, which is her claim on the black community, and I'm here to proclaim that that the racial profiling is has varying effects on minorities, and racial profiling also occurs on the majority race, which is the whites. So for the first claim, she uses, which is her first claim, which is it dehumanizes the minorities. She used the film Get Out as an example, which she shows us this. She tells us a scenario where the black protagonist was with this white woman, and then the cops were with them, and then they thought it was more of a black on white incident. And to counteract that, though, using a film isn't really sufficient evidence to support that claim, because usually the movie industry tends to dramatize a specific plot line or an action. And for another counterclaim for her first secondary claim is that racial profiling is used by the cops is usually used on the low-income minority neighborhoods, which street crimes are usually much more common in the other communities, which that concludes for my first claim. For the secondary claim, she mentions that it has a negative effect on the youth, which is that it creates post-traumatic stress disorder and lower self-esteem on the youth. Well, that actually has varying effects on the youth itself, mostly because because she then which is technically a very hypothetical evidence, because the person's socioeconomic status, their educational status, mainly their personality as well, will coincide with the effects of the post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as the self-esteem, mostly because if that racial profiling happens to them, it varies differently if they know that they did nothing wrong, or if they actually did something wrong, or if they, or other psychological reasons. Then for my third claim, which is she mentions that the minorities, makes the minorities distrust the system. Well, first off, racial, what I mentioned, like I mentioned in the very beginning, racial profiling doesn't have to be the minorities. It also happens with the majority race, which is the whites. And actually the whites produce a much more higher crime rate than the black community, which her main claim actually just revolves around the black community, and she uses some evidence on blacks and Hispanics only, but never the other minorities or the majority race itself. Like, for instance, the white racial profiling, they found out that more than 50% of the crime rates are on whites, and when it comes to white women, it's actually more than 40% participate in the crimes, which is a lot. And like speaking of the other minorities, the Asian race is usually outlooked, and then when it comes to racial profiling, mostly it's because it depends on the race and the demographics of the law enforcement itself, and as well as the location. So, for instance, stop and frisk from the New York Police Department, they use that technique to find crime, but they usually use that on the black community, which actually creates tension, but the stop and frisk actually gives better results on stopping crime. And to go back to that, it depends on the demographics and of the law enforcement and the victims. There's actually crime where the blacks attack on the other minority race because they perceive that specific race as easy and not as tough to counteract, which is, I forgot that. All right, and that's what is all for my refute against Avril. Mostly it's because it's more of like a personal thing and also media imprint on us, because the perception on the black community usually depends on what we perceive in ourselves as well. So it's sort of like an abstract concept of racial profiling due to the varying results.
All right, I'm getting a lot of internal summaries of what the advocate's argument is, and I'm not always clear on what it is that your response to that happens to be. The argument on the first point, suggesting why we shouldn't use Get Out as an example, that I thought was pretty reasonable, that they over-dramatize things in films, and so it's not really representative. Okay, I appreciate that. But then, you've got this argument that says that they use this by cops in low-income neighborhoods. It sounds to me like you're making an argument that says that it's really related to low income and not to ethnic profiling, but to the income in the area. But that's not the way you said it, and so I'm not sure that that's the claim that you're making. And there's no evidence to support that either, so it's just kind of an assertion on your part. The same thing is true with the other parts here, that you have a tendency to kind of explain some things. There are varying effects on youth when it comes to PTSD, and it's all hypothetical that's going on here. And, there's socioeconomic stuff that's applying here, and I'm going, yeah, but where's the part that tells me that it's not important, it's insignificant, it's unrelated to the use of profiling? I don't get any of that. It sounds like you're trying to argue a counter-causality issue here, but again, that's not very clear. I think that you need to make a definitive claim here that says the PTSD of youth in these communities is a result of factors other than profiling. make a declarative statement instead of these long, kind of rambling, expository statements. You got to tell us what inference it is that you want us to draw. And then where's the evidence to support that point? I don't know. I didn't really get any evidence after the explanation. I got a lot of assertions that that's true, and you're not citing any data to support the positions that you're presenting here. The argument at the bottom where you're talking about distrust, and then you mentioned that whites are also kind of profiled as well. I'm not exactly sure what the statistics prove. You say 50% of crime is generated by whites. Okay, I can kind of understand what that statistic is. And then 40% by white women. I'm going, wait a second, what are you saying with this particular argument? I don't know where it's going and why it's being included here. The idea that stop and frisk is potentially an effective strategy for dealing with crime, regardless of who it happens to be used on. I guess that's a reasonable argument. It's even better if you can say that it has had an effect on reducing crime. And then we go back to the argument that you made earlier that it's really used in places because of the economic circumstances, not because of the ethnic group that's going on there. Say that so that we know what your claim is. You do get kind of caught up in some of the minutia that's going on there. I didn't hear much challenge to the evidence that the advocate's presenting, just like I said, kind of a reevaluation of what some of the advocate's argument was without necessarily knowing what the counterclaims are. And it's a lot overtime, by the way. All right, thank you.